Very, very good to see you. My name is Ben Rich. I'm the Chief Executive of Radix Big Tent. And for those who don't know us, Radix Big Tent is the system change think tank. We are focused on the complex adaptive systems that dictate all of our lives, and none more so than the economy. Couple of housekeeping points. Please, we want this to be discursive. So, firstly, if you like leaving your camera on, feel free to leave your camera on, although please make sure you're muted, otherwise, we'll hear you arguing with your partners over what to have for tea. And please join in by posting comments, questions throughout in chat, and I'll make certain that either I or you get the opportunity to throw those at our speakers. Lastly, just to say, if you enjoy today, then we don't charge for these events, but we're always very happy to be paid. So with that, if you are like me, you could have spent the entire day in different budget review webinars. I've done 3 myself, and I don't really want to cover the same ground. So instead, to plagiarize Jonathan Friedland, I thought we could at least start by taking the long view of the budget. Not so much, if a tax rate here or a relief there makes a difference, but just overall, what does it tell us about where the UK economy could or should be focused? To do that, I've got with me 2 of Britain's leading economists. Andy Ross is both an academic and a practitioner economist. He's the former Deputy Director of the Government Economics Service, a founding fellow of the Royal Economic Society and a fellow of the Society of Professional Economists and of the Academy of Social Science. And I've got more than another page of Bug I can tell you how eminent he is, but I won't, because I'll move on to Vicky, who is our very own chair of fellows and normally chairs these events for those that don't know. So I have to be on my very best behaviour. She's a former DG for economics at the Department of Biz, joint head of the Government Economic Service, and currently Chief Economic Advisor at the Centre for Economic and Business Research. Now, together, Vicky and Andy have written a number of books, including It's the Economy Stupid, or How to Be a Successful Economist. And last week, they published Mismanaged Decline, What Politicians Won't Tell You About the Economy. So I'm going to start there. And taking into account yesterday's budget, Andy, what is it that Rachel Reeves won't tell us about the economy?
Well, yes, as we explained in this book that you helpfully mentioned, Mismanaged Decline. I mean, it's she's been lucky at the moment, to be honest, right? So she was fortunate that she was driven less by necessity than everybody expected. Although it's not for a very good reason, in a sense, because it's mainly because inflation has impinged in a way that helped her out. Real GDP is still flat, but nominal GDP went up a bit because of inflation, and of course that tends to give you tax revenues. But the long run trajectory is less optimistic, I'm afraid. The OBR has to go with the assumptions that it's given by the government. It's not allowed to question them. And that, I mean, the OBR can't turn around and say, we don't believe you. Prime example is the petrol tax, of course, which is always going to go up, but never does. The long run trajectory is that it's getting tighter still. It is interesting though, because I mean, it depends how far back you go. I mean, Britain's got, as we explain in the book, long-standing decline, as it were, from history and policy. But we've landed where we are. But if you actually look at the more recent budget, this one is still really just a sort of an extension of a trajectory which was under the last parliament, the last government, Conservative government, where spending has been increasing and taxation has had to increase to follow it. She could have taken some of this.
Andy, I'm going to throw your question back
Okay.
back again. What is it that she's not telling us?
Oh, right. Okay. Well, I was coming to that. This bit of good luck that she's had at the moment is probably not going to last. It's also the case that, I say, if you look at what's built into the OBR, some of for example, the tax is backdated, and the spending is front. So we have a rise in borrowing, and then we have rather sketchy plans on what the spending restraints are in the future, and the necessity from the productivity downgrades, from what might not appear because the tax increases are very speculative in terms of the revenue that will come in. We've got, of course, health, education, all these pressing things and whatever. And so we're going to come into a situation later in this parliament, which is closer to the election, where we don't know those taxes are going to materialise. Is she really going to decrease the spending as she says she's going to do, which is the only reason she's meeting the fiscal rules is because of projected decrease in spending? Really? As that rubs up against the general election? Does that sound very convincing to you?
Well, let me throw that to Vicky. Does
Right.
it convince you? Are you?
Well, I mean, we absolutely need to look, I mean, as we do in the book, at how we got to where we are now. I mean, the real problem has been, of course, we've been through a number of crises. So there's absolutely no doubt that quite a lot of our industries which were supporting us in the past, whether you look at the North Sea, whether you look at chemicals, pharmaceuticals seem to be doing okay, even though they're now being attracted to invest a lot in the US because of what's happening on tariffs. But we've seen this decline and this move into the financial sector being if you like, the thing that kept the economy going by being quite productive. I mean, the aerospace sector had also declined, shipbuilding had declined. And the way that we used to look at productivity, which is one of the things which the OBR has been focusing on, and that's why I'm mentioning it, because it matters very much on where we may be going from now, is by how much people were getting paid in particular sectors. So that was an indication of high productivity. So the financial sector, interestingly enough, was paying people quite a lot. So we got into this sort of comfort zone of thinking that everything was fine. We had a very productive sector in the financial industry. And that sector, banks, insurance companies, and everything else around it, the whole ecosystem, were going to see us through. And we were becoming quite good at that. And then, of course, we had the financial crisis. Where people lost their jobs, wages sort of slumped and all that sort of stuff. Firms had to be rescued. Loads and loads of regulation was then put in place. And that, of course, slowed down any growth that we saw after. So the interesting thing is that we have seen as a result, even though obviously bits of the financial sector have managed to recover with a lot of help from the government, of course, what has been happening is that productivity has been growing very slowly. And that slump in productivity growth is carrying through to now. Yes, of course, we had COVID and everything else. And the OBR has made it clear that when they looked a year ago at the budget, they put in a number of things that the government was doing in the short to medium term, including borrowing for investment. They borrowed a lot for investment. Just remember that they had actually they intended to spend 70 billion more a year than the Jeremy Hunt budget had assumed just before the election. Of that, 40 billion in the first budget was coming from taxes and the rest from borrowing, but a lot of spending was taking place. And that spending was perceived and assumed by the OBR in their forecast to add to growth and to productivity. So they were more lenient in terms of how much the government could borrow and what it might do, therefore, to the final point where they might find themselves, where they had a sort of headroom to make sure they covered themselves from crisis. What they're saying now is that we actually looked at all this again. We thought that COVID, the war in Ukraine, and so on, had resulted in a drop in productivity growth, which was temporary, and it was going to recover. The interesting thing is that they have changed their minds. They now look back to a large part of the period that we cover in the book and saying, actually, it's a much longer malaise, and that malaise is still with us, and it's not really going to take us into the sunny uplands. So they're not really anticipating very much growth to come, irrespective of what happens with this budget and the next budget and the next election, we seem to be stuck in this period of low growth. And if that is the case, then we've got a real problem in terms of how we fund the welfare bill, the demographic changes that are happening, such as people aging a lot and needing a lot of support, and all the sickness benefits and everything else that's out there, which is going to cripple the state to a considerable extent as we move forward, unless we can get that growth picture reversed.
So let me just be a thick layperson, as I've explained to our speakers today. I'm not an economist, and so I don't really quite get this. And I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing the problem is growth, and I'm hearing the problem is productivity. Do you see the two as interchangeable? Because clearly there was a lot in that first budget which was designed to drive growth through investment. But was there anything for productivity? Is that the mistake they're making?
Well, they assumed that quite a lot of the investment that was taking place was going to increase their productivity. And what they have done now is they've decided that isn't going to be the case. And they have much slower growth of productivity going ahead when you look at the next few years. And every little drop in productivity means you collect less revenues because there is less growth. Even though there is more inflation and more people, because of the freezing of the thresholds, are coming into paying the tax, it leaves you with a long-term problem. There is a limit to how long you can do that. Also politically, loads of people find that their real living standards are not growing anything like as fast as they had hoped. If you look again at the forecast of this budget, they have real personal disposable incomes, the average disposable incomes actually growing the slowest pace that we have seen in decades. And that is a serious problem for the population generally. And interestingly enough, even though we're growing right now faster than G7 countries, the GDP per capita is growing, personal disposable incomes are growing at the slowest rate of all those countries.
So Andy, let me come back to you. If there's really nothing in this budget, and I assume you agree with Vicky, that's going to drive productivity, what would you have liked to have seen? What might have made a difference? Or is all of this really beyond the politicians?
No, I do usually agree with Vicky, that's true. Yeah, I mean, it's very strange. It's actually 0.4 is a forecast of growth per year on the disposable income, and it actually fell during the last parliament. But the only way out, I mean, you say it did a lot for investment. Well, it didn't really. I mean, some things we hope will come through, like back in the builders, not the blockers and all that sort of thing. But it only really restored the reversed what the Conservatives said they were going to cut. So it wasn't really a huge step up on what was already planned. It just reinstated it. And even now, I mean, the public investment is higher. That's good. We don't know how much private is going to suck in. We hope the wealth fund, whatever it is, sovereign fund, does manage that. But I would say really there was very little for growth. I mean, in this budget, the OBR couldn't find anything that it could actually score. It has to have an estimated about 0.1, I think, on GDP, but there's nothing in the whole of the budget that they could point that would do that. Rachel Reeves would say, oh, well, there's lots of little things and many a mickle makes a muckle or something, but it's not clear at all that this government's done much for growth. Really, I'm afraid, as we explain in the book, unless you're going to go for this magic fairy where you cut tax and all of a sudden there's massive growth, which clearly the markets don't really believe in that much, otherwise, by the way they behave. But then you're going to have to, all right, you're going to have to pay your way. You're going to have to pay current expenditure from taxation, more or less, year by year. That's fair enough. But we're not going to be able to raise the tax for investment, in which case we're going to have to borrow, I'm afraid, more. To invest. So we need a lot more investment. Public investment is around 2.7, but that's still below our competitors. And there's a huge backlog that we haven't cleared. And that's, for me, I mean, it's called a productivity puzzle, but I don't find it that puzzling. We've invested less than other countries. So you're going to have to take a leap as a business. It's like, if you don't invest, your business deteriorates. And that's basically, like any business, you have to keep up with the competition. That takes investment. We're going to have to borrow. There's a risk, because if we borrow and it doesn't produce the growth, then we're in trouble. The problem for this government is that when you invest, it's not an automatic boost to the economy. It takes a long time, particularly if you're doing the private sector trying to bring them in, and that is longer probably than the electoral cycle. So
Andy, sorry to interrupt, but let me just
sure,
draw you back, and I want to pick up the comment from Ashok in the chat, and please, by the way, everybody feel free to chuck in your comments, and I'll try and feed them to our speakers at the appropriate moment. But I mean, he asked a sort of the pre-question: is the borrowing that's actually going on really going into driving investment, or is it actually being used for current spending?
Well, for the moment, it's used for both. I mean, the interesting thing is that there are the fiscal rules which say you should only borrow for investment and not for day-to-day spending. But of course, it is within a rolling average. So in 3 years' time, we should have achieved the position where we are in balance as far as spending and taxes are concerned for current spending. In other words, what the department spend on staff, on all the things that you need the department to be achieving its priorities. But for the short term, it is actually still financed by borrowing, quite a lot of that current spending, including whatever's been happening with the NHS, which has received the bulk of the money this year, and where, of course, not just in the NHS, but more widely, we've seen very substantial increases in wages. And remember, I said before, the government is actually borrowing an awful lot of money over the next few years. 120 billion of it is supposed to be going to investment, but a certain amount of that is now being diverted into making sure that all the other stuff gets done. And as Andy was saying, quite a lot of the tax increases, certainly for this budget, are happening later. So in the short term, it's borrowing that is funding all the extra costs that are necessary, such as meeting the welfare bill and increasing or lifting the two-child benefit cap. So that's the situation we're in now. Now, the other question is what happens with the money that actually does go into investment. A lot of it is announced, but again, it happens with a gap. Or with a lag, because you need to get also the private sector to be involved. So if you're announcing you're going to be investing an awful lot for a new nuclear plant, for example, or lots of little nuclear plants to fund to be able to have enough energy for all these data centers that are coming in, but that takes some time. So, and are you actually picking the right areas? Are you picking the right winners? I mean, we've had to suddenly change all our plans and support the steel sector, for example, or suddenly, because of whatever trade deals we've got, some of our sectors are no longer sustainable because we've allowed a lot of competition coming in. So there has to be a lot of flexibility. And there's always the worry that we may be putting money in areas which, we've chosen as being the ones for the future. And then we find that actually this isn't the case and we made a mistake because we can't compete with others. So there's always a danger in terms of government investment. But what it needs to do is encourage the private sector to also think or come along and say, yes, this is the right way, the right area to invest in, and more or less incentivize them to also join in, because the government alone cannot actually achieve the aims of really getting the industrial sector to do better or invest in the areas which will really make a difference.
Okay. So, and in terms of areas that are going to really make a difference, let me just pick up Margaret's question, and I'll throw this to either of you. And is AI the answer? Is that what we should be investing in? Is it suddenly about to produce a miracle for us, or is it wishful thinking? I asked Chat GPT and it said it sorted all.
It said what?
It said it sorted all out.
Well, it would, wouldn't it? Okay. I mean, it's largely futurology, isn't it? We don't know the impact. I mean, on AI, it's like, previously technology, people were worried about it, but it's actually increased income and it actually created more jobs than it destroyed. It's very easy to see the jobs that go. It's much harder to see the jobs that it creates. And we're going to have, that's in the longer run, perhaps. Meanwhile, of course, we had the IT technology where, was it Solo said you could see the IT revolution everywhere except in the productivity figures. So we've been there before. But yeah, I mean, it could be different in the long run. I mean,
Yeah.
but no one knows for certain. You can't know for certain. Trouble is, if it is the way the world's going, and we're not in it, then we really are in trouble.
Well, what we've seen, and I mean, Margaret will have looked at it, but what we've seen is that among small firms, I mean, it's the adoption of AI that really matters, or technology. And what we've seen in terms of the pressures that companies have and have had for a while in terms of, yes, I don't know if you've been listening today to the latest news that the government has decided to claw back a little bit in terms of the new workers' rights bill by saying people will not have rights from the very beginning, but they will have to wait for 6 months. The cost to businesses have been quite enormous, at least in their worry about it, from the new workers' rights, and also, of course, minimum wage going up, and also all sorts of extra regulations coming in on the environmental side and so on, that they have been cutting back. And AI has been one way in which they have been able to do it. That's among the smaller and medium-sized firms. What you find for the bigger firms is that they use it to expand, indeed, investments, and a lot of innovation takes place. So if there are going to be benefits, they are the ones that are enjoying the most, or will enjoy the most, but it's a relatively small group of firms that will be able to do that, and in the process they're eating up all the rest. And so far, for the economy as a whole, we haven't seen AI having a serious productivity improvement. In terms of the government, which is a crucial bit of the whole picture, once again in this budget we heard Rachel Reeves claim that there are going to be even more efficiency improvements, AI, of course, being one of the ways. She didn't use the word, but she talked about efficiency improvements in various areas. Digitalization, of course, helps. But of course, they have been expecting efficiency improvements at each budget that I can remember, and they only happen partially. If AI is going to really come in and make a big difference there, then yes, obviously it would help. I mean, it already has made a difference in terms of outcomes for in the health area. Absolutely, medicine and diagnostics and all that sort of stuff. Which is good news. But in terms of really reducing the amount of spend that needs to be put in various governments, it's actually for the moment not very clear. So overall, AI, yes, of course, amazing, but in terms of the spread across the economy, it hasn't really quite done it.
It's not the answer, is what you're saying at the moment, or the answer. We're in capital THE. Let me pick up Michael's comment then, and I want to again sort of give ourselves this long view. So Michael's asserting that Michael Holland in the chat that there's a strong correlation between cutting government spending and faster growth. Now, is that I haven't managed to complete your whole book because I only got it at the last minute. But in the early chapters I'm reading it, I'm not certain that's what I'm seeing. So do you agree, disagree? And who wants to go first? Vicky, do you want to go?
I'll go first only because I've also seen the other comment on the NHS, which has come in, and indeed it's absolutely true. We use AI in the NHS, and it does make a difference. But on cutting spending, we do have quite a lot of that in the book, because of course we talk about the austerity period during George Osborne, where government spending was cut quite significantly, and where you also saw, actually, if you're worried about how much headroom the Chancellor has now, the biggest headrooms were during the period of the coalition government and then the Conservative government. But unfortunately, in the effort to have a big headroom, they also cut back very, very significantly in terms of government spending, and we saw very little growth. And what really happened is that productivity suffered quite significantly, and it's one of the things that the OBR now has looked at and seen that this reduction in productivity and also in investment, which of course is linked, has had a lasting longer term impact on productivity in the UK, and it's one of the reasons why we also, when we call the book Mismanaged Decline, we are reaching this situation right now where something major needs to give for that to be reversed.
Do you agree with that, Andy?
Yeah, I mean, very few economists now would argue that austerity was a good policy.
to be fair to Michael, he's talking about the last 50 years. So you're focusing on the last 15. Is there a basis for saying that cutting government spending, if we go back a little further?
It's not necessarily cutting. I mean, if you can divert to investment, you can get more growth, but that's a painful thing to do, which is even harder in developing countries, of course, to face that problem for a long, long time. To get out of poverty, you have to invest, but to do that, there's pain. If we want to put more to investment, there's more current pain, which is difficult, especially in a democracy. I don't know. I mean, you can also sometimes, if you borrow, it's like any business plan, right? If it's a good business plan, you can borrow and you can pay it back, and people will lend you money. If it's a poor business plan and people don't believe it, then you're not going to get growth. I don't think it's nearly as straightforward to say that if you like a smaller state, a faster growth. I mean, if you really want to go an extreme example, of course, China has a massive state, and it's had massive growth compared to the rest of the world for a long, long time.
Because it started from a low base. I mean, the interesting thing is going further back, since we've got all this in the book as well. Of course, we had loads and loads of private. It was the private entrepreneurs, if you like, who put the money and expanded various areas, which then led to actually they funded and expanded the empire on behalf of the state, if you want to call it that. But of course, the state had to intervene in various stages to ensure that people were properly looked after with labor laws and everything else. So it all depends really what you mean about government spending. There are lots of countries, as Andy was suggesting, who spend more, including, for example, France, which is considerably more involved in the state. And they haven't done any worse than us. Yes, right now they've got a real problem because they don't have an effective government. But generally, they haven't done that badly at all. So we need to bear that in mind. But the state is involved in all sorts of different ways. You could cut down the amount of spending that they do, but of course, right now we're taking over all the rail companies. So all that is coming to the state, and we may, who knows, what we're going to do with all the other sectors that we privatized, such as the water industry and electricity. So we'll see what happens there. But I think electricity at least seems to be doing the right things more or less, and but maybe again we need to think about regulation. But actually the state is involved to such a great extent in everything that happens in the economy.
Yes.
If you look at the FTSE 100, something like 80% of this, or 80 of those companies are directly linked with the government, in the sense that, they say, they sell defense stuff to the government. The pharmaceutical companies have the prices controlled in terms of what they sell to the state, very linked to the NHS and whatever happens there. R&D investment, the state gets very involved in giving all sorts of incentives for that investment to happen. And then if you look at banks, they are controlled, even though they're now about to be regulated a bit less, but they certainly come under a lot of direct supervision. If you even look at supermarkets or anything like that, if they become too big, the competition authorities step in. So we shouldn't just look at the spending as being the determinant of it. It's really the extent to which the state is involved. And what you really want is for it to be benign, to have the sort of conditions around businesses which allow for that, encourage for that investment and growth to happen. And there is a question, if you just bring it to now, is that happening? And I think the criticisms that have been laid to say a huge amount of uncertainty. Right now we seem to be raising taxes to just fund more welfare. So companies from last year and now individuals as well are the ones who are doing this transfer. Is this right? So the real question is, I think as was asked earlier, is that money going in the right way?
Yes.
And rather than should the state intervene? Because in reality, most economies are very mixed, and at times you need to be even more involved in the economy as a government than is the case perhaps in other times when the need is really important, like for example with COVID.
Let me move us slightly on and can bring us back to a question that was posed before the session began by David Patey. And David asks, has the government needlessly constrained its options by adopting the household analogy of government finances? And I wanted to sort of use that to again sort of look back, but also forward, because one of the things that we were hearing time and again about this budget is that it lacks a narrative. There's not a single main theme. It's just smorgasbord is the phrase that we're all supposed to use to describe it. And there's not telling a story. And that was Thatcher's great story. But what do you think, and I'll ask you each in turn, should be the story behind the budget at the moment? What should have been the story, and then supported, no doubt, by the financial changes they want to make? Who wants to go first? Andy, do you want to have a go at that first?
Well, first of all, the household analogy is, of course, daft. As far as I know, in my house, we can't pass laws that bring in more tax revenues, and we certainly can't print our own money without someone telling us not to do that. Fiscal rules, though, can be quite useful, and they can be a problem as well. She's got a fiscal rule. It can, calm the bond market. It looks good. The trouble is, if you don't leave yourself much headroom, then you're forever knee-jerking to meet it and making quick, unplanned decisions, which is not a good idea. The main function, I think, to be honest, my impression is the main function of fiscal rules is so the Chancellor can turn round to other ministers and say no. So we have to make, because they're all pressing for money, they all want more money for their department, so it helps them say no. But still, she had a choice. She could have tried to keep tax down with this almost like a windfall for her. She chose not to. I say it's a political. The budget was more political and about bond markets than it was about economics. She's looking over her shoulder at the bond markets, which are now much more sensitive than they used to be in 2007. It's a very different situation now, and we're already top of the G7 on the cost of borrowing from abroad, and that's worrying. So I think she. I don't want to criticise that. I mean, that was Labour values, as it were. That was the manifesto that we're going to help people out. And I, for one, will say, stopping the two-child cap was the right thing to do, a politically courageous thing to do. And the Daily Express is already attacking it with false numbers and God knows what, and pointing out ethnicity and things. It's not a good analogy. It's not a good analogy at all. Fiscal rules do have a role. Trouble is, this one's better because she's less likely to leech off the capital because she's separated, it's asymmetric. But do watch out for some creative accounting in the future with the new snuffle. For example, education, it's not current expenditure, really, it's investment for the future, isn't it? Health service, we're keeping the workforce healthy, it's an investment. So I think we might get some of that down the line. It would be interesting to see how the OBR interprets that.
And I see Dr. Majot Sidhu is suggesting that in part in his narrative around the benefit. I was interested that we got a moral imperative around that, but we didn't get an investment. Vicky, is that the narrative that you would have been going for?
The narrative being
the narrative of the budget. What do you think should have been the story that the Chancellor should have been telling people? What do you think she wants people to understand about her values or what she's trying to do?
Well, I mean, there are obviously some Labour values that she needs to have there so that she can keep, Stammer and herself can keep the backbenchers on site. So that's important. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with what she did on. I mean, the interesting thing about the two-child benefit cap is that it was not popular in terms of removing it across the country. Yeah. So the opinion polls suggest that most people were quite happy with the cap being there, and she removed it because it mattered for her backbenchers. She showed there were some Labour values there because she was attacked that anything that's happened so far didn't show any Labour values at all, and it was probably true until then. So she's done that, and it is also true that if it's 400,000 or 600,000 children who are moved out of poverty, then that's good news, even though it's going to cost quite a lot of money for us to do that. So that's okay. from that point of view. But what the narrative hasn't had in it, it has had words about growth, but not actual policies for growth. So we haven't seen any of that. So there's been absolutely nothing in this budget. But if you look at sort of previous budgets, and you encourage us to look further back, ideology has been very important in terms of how various governments have thought, or prime ministers, because sometimes it all centers around a prime minister, like with Margaret Thatcher, looked at how you can achieve growth, including, of course, what happened after the Second World War, where, you know, there was this belief that actually, you know, we had to have a National Health Service, which is going to be looking after everybody, because that was imperative. As things improved in terms of wanting to look after your people, at other times, like with Margaret Thatcher, the ideology was that you were going to have growth if, indeed, thinking of the Michael Holland question earlier, you got the state a lot less involved. So you deregulated, which is one of the things that Rachel Reeves is doing. It's slightly schizophrenic actually right now, because of course they're deregulating the financial sector. They have agreed to let bonuses go as high as they want to be. They have not reinstated the levy on banks. So for some reason, that side of the economy seems to be still benefiting from a more sort of Thatcherite type view of the world. But anyway, so the ideology was that you could have faster growth by privatizing, by reducing the role of the state, by getting investment to happen, because the private sector would know where to put that money. And of course, you gave them lots of incentives. You took you relieved big sectors from their pension obligations, took them on the state, which of course made life more difficult for public sector finances. But nevertheless, you allowed the private sector to come in and in a way, you know, let the market sort of do the talking, which of course, you know, wasn't an easy path to you know, achieving a little bit of faster growth later, but it seemed to have worked for a bit and captured the imagination. But as I explained earlier, the state still has a very big role. I mean, when you look, and we have something in the book as well about the rights of women, for example, non-discrimination, the market doesn't clear particularly easily. You know, capital doesn't necessarily go in the right places, and there's so much competition from abroad. So you could move the money somewhere else now that, of course, we no longer have foreign exchange restrictions, capital restrictions, so you can just move the money out. So it is much more difficult to have the ideology that says, right, we're going to protect our industry and we're going to be doing this, that, and the other, because it's just impossible to do. I mean, Trump is trying that with his tariffs. So we find ourselves, therefore, with all the shocks that come, reimagining and reinventing the role of the state and what actually works to give that growth. And the problem with the current government is that that isn't anywhere, really. You can't see what it is that does growth. Maybe, you know, the belief that if you put all the money in the National Health Service, and seems we have a doctor among us, maybe that he quite likes that tonight, and that's going to make a big difference because people will be healthier and so on. The amount of money you need to put to get to that point is so enormous that actually a different type of structure needs to be thought out and reform. And so we don't see any real ideology, if you like, in terms of how you get that growth to happen. And that's what's left, I think, businesses wondering what's going to hit them next and thinking of doing something else, and people leaving the country. So it's a very unsatisfactory state of affairs right now, where I can't detect it in anything that she said today, yesterday, whenever it was.
I'm gonna interrupt. I'm gonna ask one more short narrative question. I really want a very concise answer to this. Obviously, there was the choice that Rachel Reeves had earlier on in the budget process of simplifying things, breaking her manifesto pledge and putting a penny on income tax, and trying to make the case for that. Do you think that would have been a narrative case that she could make, or was she frankly too constrained? And I don't know which of you wants to have a short go at that. And then I'm going to come to the questions I'm being asked to put to you from James.
Do you want me to say something?
Yeah, good.
It would have been, I mean, it would have been, yes, it would have been much better. I mean, this smorgasbord of tax changes, I mean, it was about 43, about 75 measures overall. It's a massive
88.
88, right? That's massively complicated. And all these taxes are very speculative. They're not worked out. I mean, the EV, don't even know how we're going to charge them, whose house is valued when and what threshold. And we're going to argue about whether you've improved it or not. So there's loads and loads of things where the yield is uncertain, right? It would have been much simpler. The thresholds really...
And politically possible, question mark?
I don't know.
Previous
Yes.
What was stupid was to make the pledge in the first place. It was reckless and frankly dishonest.
Vicky,
Right. No, I agree. She should have reversed the national insurance cut by Jeremy Hunt, the 20 billion that was there immediately when she realized that this hadn't even been properly funded. So from the moment they came in, then she wouldn't have had to increase national insurance contributions for on businesses directly, which of course has led to quite a lot of slowdown in growth. That's really why you realize that they had no growth plan at all. And right now, she should, since she got everyone used to the idea of income tax increases just before she gave up on the idea, everyone thought it was going to happen. So she should have done it too. Politically, of course, it would have been hard because obviously she had to reverse it because there was revolt from the backbenchers and a revolt also in the sense of concern about Keir Starmer's continued leadership. So I think in the end, it was a political reason why she didn't do it. Plus, the finances looked a little bit better. She still had to raise 30 billion, so she could have put 2p in the pound on income tax, and she would have raised 20 billion from just the 20% band, another 4 billion from the 40% band, and about $500 million from the 45% band, just like that. And that would have been certain, because if you look at the composition of receipts, it's income tax about 300 and odd billion, and then you have national insurance contributions about 170, and the same for VAT. These are the three areas where most of the money is raised, and you know how much you're going to raise, and that's the dividend. Now we have no idea. We have to spend all this time calculating when exactly is this coming in, how much is it going to raise, how are people going to change, are they not going to buy EVs in the future, so are you going to have to do something else, and all these boring things which we could have done without.
So let's leave tax rises just for a moment, and let's go back to trying to grow the economy. And Robert is saying that it's the private sector that's going to drive job generation, and he's asking what simple changes to the tax system should Rachel Reeves have implemented to make it easier for the private sector to create jobs.
He's unmuted himself, so Robert may want to ask something supplementary.
Yeah, I think it's more fundamental than that. I think that this is a government that understands the multiplier effect of capital investment from the government into the economy centrally. It has no idea what it takes to create a business, run a business, the risk it takes to employ someone, the margins that businesses have to work through, the need to store up capital in a business for investment. It really is blind on the private sector and what entrepreneurs need to generate wealth. It's all very well taxing wealth, but you have to have an engine to develop that wealth, and that can't just be from government investment in infrastructure. So that's really where I think that she's had two budgets now. She's failed to address the weaknesses that really started with George Osborne. And it's as if she doesn't understand it, and it's as if there's no one amongst the hundreds of Labour MPs that have ever run a business and know what it takes and know what's needed to take the shackles off and allow us to start making money again for the nation.
Okay, well, historically, I think we should remind you that, sorry, Ben, that in previous governments, which had more people who had run their own businesses, also failed. And which government was it that decided to go ahead? Of course, you couldn't say that Boris Johnson ran a business, but he was in the private sector for a while. But some of his lieutenants and other cabinet ministers had run businesses in the Tory party. He, of course, went ahead with HS2, which I don't know whether you think about it, Robert, but it's
I'm
a big waste of money.
I'm not justifying any of these big capital investment programs. That's
Yeah.
that's the bit that Labour, I think, they get the multiplier effect.
Yes.
They'll invest in different things, whether it's aircraft carriers under the Gordon Brown government or something else.
Yeah.
I'm talking about private entrepreneurs.
I'm gonna throw your question back, Robert, because I did want to get an answer for you. Are the government employers doing enough to support workers to stay in? Sorry, no, I've grabbed the wrong question.
Yes.
But what are those simple changes that you want Rachel Reeves to make it easier for private businesses to create jobs and create wealth? Go for it, Vicky. Or Andy.
Sorry, I mean, perhaps Andy wants to say something, but first of all, you want to listen to them. And the interesting thing is that there are loads and loads of meetings between business bodies and the government, and they seem to understand it when they're there, and then perhaps they forget when they leave. I mean, businesses want certainty. They want some support with the labor force and the skills. They want some support in terms of exporting, and they want stability, which they haven't really got until now, with lots of governments in the past, but also strangely with this one as well, even though stability was promised for them, and an understanding of how difficult all these regulations are on them. Of course, businesses always complain about regulation, sometimes unfairly, but they have to have the type of government which understands their issues, which vary hugely, of course, from sector to sector. Like, for example, right now, with the industrial strategy, the hospitality and retail sector feels that they've been ignored, and they're the ones who are now suffering, particularly when the national insurance contributions change was made, because of course they lowered the threshold as well from when you have to pay that, and of course it meant that all those sectors which pay only a little by comparison to a little, which are not very productive and don't actually pay big salaries, are finding themselves really having this extra cost to bear, and they're just not employing the right people, and they don't want to expand. So there is all that. And the other thing that businesses need, or would have been, better relations with Europe, which this government has been talking about, but has been very slow in actually implementing it.
Andy.
Well, I was going to say, I'm very pleased that the day one rights thing has gone. I mean, that was, someone signs up and signs off sick on day one or something. It was ridiculous. But the other thing, Vicky and I agree, we can agree, although we did have a discussion about it. It was, the employer NICs has been really a bit of a disaster. It's far too much. And it also shows one of the problems, if you don't use the big taxes, you have to put far too much on the smaller taxes, and they distort more. But Andy King, recently at the OBR, said if we'd taken the employer NICs increase and then reverse some of Jeremy Hunt's employee NICs, and then because, as Robert has said, through helping employment, really, that would have raised about 8.5 billion. And Andy King he's very recent at the OBR, and he said that's been in the OBR for a long time. A chance has never done it, and it's well worth having 8.5, and of course the boost on the GDP and would help employers. So that would have been a very good thing to do.
So I'm gonna chuck a quick fire round. Yep. So we're going to do. I'm going to stop you both if you go on for more than 30 seconds in answering these questions. And I'm just going to work through one or two of the ones that have appeared in the chat, which I think are well worth bringing. Andy, I know can answer this one quickly. How reliable do you think the OBR forecasts are?
Well, forecasting is a mug's game. Everybody knows that. And it's a bit rich to blame it. I mean, one is, say, it has to accept the government's rules. It can't gainsay them. The other thing is lots of things can happen. And the other thing people forget about a good forecast from the OBR, one of the purposes of the forecast is to prevent that which is forecast from happening. So it can be actually a success when it's wrong.
Excellent. Very good. Just over 30 seconds, but not bad. I'm going to throw Vicky. I'm going to pick up this question about what the budget meant for GP surgeries and the impact of minimum wage. More broadly, you can open that up on health, but you've only got 30 seconds. Off you go.
Well, I have to say that I haven't got the answer about GP surgery, so maybe the doctor who asked the question can tell us. But of course, the costs that you incur. I mean, I don't think that there are very many people who work on minimum wage in surgeries, perhaps the receptionists. So I can't answer any more, I'm afraid.
Andy, do you want to?
No, I was just going to, if you'd some of the nicks would have helped the public sector as well. That's all. But I don't. I do know there was a question earlier about whether the NHS is ever so inefficient, and the answer to that is about middling. It's neither superb nor or awful.
Fantastic. And can I throw this one at you, Andy, because it's a statistical one. Our public spending as a percentage of GDP is still just below many European competitors. Do the international comparisons take account of differences in healthcare funding?
They try to. They sometimes add them back in. I mean, our tax take even now is still below some of our competitors. But it's a difficult thing. Like in America, there's low taxation, but you're not actually better off because you do then pay it through medical bills anyway. So, but there are OECD do try and adjust for medical spend sometimes and add it in. It depends. Calculating the size of the public sector is simply not a straightforward thing. It's much more complicated than it seems.
And one quick fire one to you, Vicky. Margaret says the number of unemployed due to sickness appear to be have grown significantly since the COVID pandemic. Are the government and employers doing enough to support workers to stay in employment, reduce the scarring effect of unemployment? And of course, this is part of the argument about productivity.
Well, they are now trying to do that. Originally, they thought all you need to do is just cut any of the benefits that you get, but that's been voted down. So looking at better ways of integrating people back again would be really useful. They're not doing enough at present, but I think that's one of the areas that they're focusing on about employers, but that's sort of quite hard. The process, just thinking about GP surgeries again, was that you could just sign off online someone off sick, and you didn't actually have to see them face to face. And I think perhaps if that changes, that would actually help. And businesses should really be much more involved in ensuring that the conditions in which people work are improved. But I'm afraid since COVID, we've had that increase, but we've seen it in other countries as well. Maybe a little bit more here, but it's been pretty universal.
So I'm conscious that we have to finish very, very promptly or slightly before time, and because Vicky's got to go on to LBC. So I'm going to finish by just asking you both, if you had been Chancellor yesterday, what was the one thing you would have done differently? Who wants to take that first? So, and I haven't warned our speakers I was going to ask.
No, it's fine. It's easy. I would have raised income tax.
Right. Well, gosh, very good and very concise. Vicky?
I'm afraid I agree. So that's really quick. But of course, she may have lost her job, of course, as a result. But and Stammer with her. There we go.
The nation
raised income tax, both of you. But for what? Why? Or just so that you wouldn't have done any of the smorgasbord?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Vicky, go on.
No. The question is absolutely correct because you raise it for a purpose. And there is no doubt that some of the welfare stuff needs to be done. And welfare bills are going up. I think Margaret is absolutely right that there is an issue. And again, if you listen to the OBR, they are looking at how welfare demands are rising quite significantly. And therefore, you do, I'm afraid, need to either borrow or raise taxes to keep people going, if you like, and also looked after by the NHS or other social care outfits that might exist, and that's a real issue. Plus, of course, people are aging, and you've got this. But there is one thing, if I may say, everyone. It was a good thing that triple lock wasn't touched. Not necessarily because one is at a certain age when that sort of looks quite interesting, if you see what I mean, if it continues. But it is also because we tend to just attack things that perhaps we shouldn't attack. If you look at the data, and quite a lot of what we do in the book is just highlighting that. So welfare, pension spending as a percentage of GDP in the UK is the lowest practically in Western Europe. So ours is something like 5%. If you look at France, Germany, and everyone else, well, Germany is just under 10, I think, about. But France about 13, and loads of others are even higher. So we don't actually spend as a percentage of GDP for bits of our welfare system anything like as much as others do, and yet we tend to focus on them as wrongly. So if we focus on the right things, like those people who need to be encouraged back to work, as Margaret is suggesting, then we can have much more of an impact.
Look, Vicky, Andy, we're a system change think tank, so I suppose I should try and answer my own question with a systems change, and I'm going to I'm cross with stamp duty. I'm ignoring all of the mansion tax stuff. I'm just going to sweep away those property taxes. Let's have a land value tax, and I'm certainly out of the job along with the two of you, but it would be a much better place, I think, for us to start planning our economy. Look, thank you so much. I can't believe we've sort of swept through an hour in that time. I hope others have enjoyed it. Not least, we moved at incredible pace. So if you want to listen again, we'll put the recording up of this on our website over the next 2 or 3 days. And please do. And please feel free to share it with your friends. If you've been inspired by Vicky and Andy, please click on the link that's been posted in the chat to buy the book, which has been waived. Thank you very much. I have to say, it's a very good read. I'm really enjoying it, and it takes a lot for that. Me to say that about economics. Can I also add that if you've enjoyed today and you enjoy these sorts of webinars, we've got another one next week looking at what the new Irish president means for Ireland with Philip Stevens, who's the former FT journalist. So please do join us for that. And so that we can keep doing these, you could have gone to cinema today and it would have cost you £10. This is way more entertainment. I've seen Wicked and this is much, much better. So why not give us the cost of your ticket? You can do it by clicking on the donate button in the middle of the website. Thank you so much, everyone. And Vicky, there you go, with 1 minute to spare to get to Ian Dale.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Andy, and everyone, and Ben, and everyone who arranged this, Sophie and Georgie. Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you, Andy. That was
Bye.
excellent. Really good.